So let me ask you, how prepared are you if something happens to you? What about a loved one? Stay tuned as this is what we are going to dive into today with my guest. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Journey of an Entrepreneur, where myself, Sri Mahabir, video marketing producer, is going to be bringing on a guest who's going to be sharing with us what we need to keep in mind when it comes to planning our estate, when is the right time to start the process, and much more. Again, my name is Sri, and I and my team love working with medical, dental, and law practices to help them build visibility to their practice using social media, live streaming, video, podcasting, and we have a done for you service where we take care and manage your social media. So let me get into this guest today because that's what we're here for. She is an attorney, owner of DK Law Group, 3 real estate brokerages, property management company, a mother. I mean, she's like superwoman over here. We have Diana Khan. Thank you so
Hi
much
guys.
for joining us. Hello, Yolanda. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Diana, I got to know. When you're not working on real estate or being an attorney, what do you like to do for fun?
Are you saying that I have time to do something fun? That's funny. I spend a lot of time with my kids. I prioritize my kids over anything else. So it's really what do they like to do for fun while I sit in the corner and just try to like soak up the moments. And then other than that, I don't really have a lot of time for anything. I have 3 very young kids, so I'm either working or I'm being a mom.
Ooh, how old are they?
6, 4, and 2.
Oh, yeah, they're the fun ages where they're like really in your face and want all your time. So, if you have any words of encouragement, no, I'm just kidding. Any ideas to help Diana with fun ideas for her kids, drop them in the comments. Okay, let's get into this. So, how did you get into real estate? Because we're going to find out how you got into law, but first, like, what got you into real estate?
So it's funny how when we're not looking for opportunity, things just kind of happen, right? So I grew up with not a lot. My parents did the best they could, but I worked at a fast food place. And I got into law school and I just was like, I need to go get some real life experience for the like 6 months before I go to law school. Ended up working at a small law firm, or they called themselves a law firm, but it was mostly just 2 realtors running it and a very old lawyer. And they were doing short sales in like 2010, which is a real estate negotiation when you owe more money on your mortgage than you can sell your house for. So we were negotiating that offset. And it was at the start of kind of this new market. So they had 80 clients. And 3 months later, I was running the office with about 8,000 new clients. And I was sort of known in the state as the person who can get these magical short sales negotiated. So I ended up putting off law school for 3 years. And in that time frame, I met a lot of realtors. I learned a lot about real estate because I kind of dove deep into the nitty gritty of short sales, which is for anybody who knows real estate is like the ugly side of what it's not easy at all. So you get to learn by doing the hard stuff first. So then I learned more about the easier normal transactions. And I was like, oh, I like this. This is nice. And then I went to law school for a few years and went back to real estate.
So you always wanted to be in law. So now it's like, okay, so now that you've become a real estate agent, you went to law school. When
Mhm.
did you decide that you wanted to focus in on trust? Because that's like really interesting. And we'll get into what is a trust. But first, I want to ask, like, how did you specialize and focus on trust?
So I mean, it was like sort of a journey, right? Like I learned a little bit about estate planning. I went to work at a couple big law firms, and what I learned about myself is that I couldn't really work for other people. Um, I just I'm a doer and I like to dive in and do things. So I went back to real estate mostly because I was like, I want to create this enterprise of lawyers and sort of help people, but I can't do that and make money and support my family. So let me make law a passive income. So I went back to doing real estate, and then slowly but surely I started a practice that all the real estate leads would kind of feed into it, and my law firm started booming. And then 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, my mom actually got really sick. So, you okay over there?
Yeah, we just have like it was lighter earlier and now it's pitch dark. So, and we have memos coming in saying something's going on outside.
I
So,
have that effect on people. It's fine.
yes, you bring the thunder.
No, but my mom got sick a couple years ago, probably 2 years ago or so, and just like the short sale situation, I went from knowing a little bit about trusts and doing them in my pastime to make some extra income in my law firm to having this experience that I had to dive into. My mom, I had just given birth. My daughter was 2 weeks old. My, I had two other kids that were older. Height of COVID, right? Just perfect timing. My mom went to Cancun for a week and she comes back. She's 69, completely healthy when she leaves. She comes back. She's not looking so hot. Couple days later, we thought it was COVID. She tested negative, but we were just like, this is COVID. Um, 3 days later, she collapsed at home. She'd been on the floor for 13 hours. And I called 911 to take her to the hospital, and she refused care. And the EMTs left her, and they left. And that was kind of like a very long journey into, instead of learning what trusts are and learning about power of attorneys, I had to learn by doing. That was the start of a 6-month experience where my mom had multiple surgeries. My mom was in ICU and life support. And outside of just what was going on with her, I had 3 young kids. And it was this realization that she was fine. Now she's not. And I have to make responsibilities and decisions for her and my dad, while also choosing things like, I'm not going to breastfeed because I need to drive 45 minutes to an ICU. And then there was like a formula shortage. And somewhere in that story, I just looked around and I said, if people don't have the means to understand how to navigate challenging situations like this, there's no way they would have survived. I mean, I barely survived it. And there was a lot in there of just crazy situations. We were in one hospital, they told us she was going to die, and then a fellow came up to us and said, get her to another hospital. I disagree with the doctor. And my mom did not have any of her affairs in order. So, not going to say what I did because it's on live, but let's just say that she signed documents that we needed to get her out of the hospital for, and got her to the new hospital with these documents, and now said I was going to make decisions on her behalf. And height of COVID, can't be in the hospital. Super Bowl Sunday, get a phone call from a surgeon. Should we amputate her leg or let her die? And it just happened just like that. And I remember I said, amputate her leg. And I hung up and I said, my mom would never have wanted that. She never would have. But you can't, as a person, say, I want to do X or Y for my family if it means death. So that kind of got me into trust a little bit, because when I got out of the situation, it was a really rough year. Thankfully, my mom ended up getting very lucky. She didn't lose her leg. She was in the hospital for 6 months. She was on life support. We went from she's not going to survive to, she's doing better. But in that time frame, I just learned a lot about what grief and how nobody really, I think I said this to you before we started, most people don't just drop down and die, right? Like it's not very common. It happens, but it's not very common. And most of us have spouses or families or kids, and we don't think about worst case scenario till we're living through it. So I sort of pivoted and I said, let me find a way to help people regardless of socioeconomic standing, or, let's not make it a black and white. You have to make an appointment with a lawyer between 9 to 5, because my mom was in the hospital on a Super Bowl Sunday and she needed legal documents drafted up. So I just kind of adapted and modified that version. And then from there, I just learned a lot about why trusts are so important for entrepreneurs in general, and like liabilities, and just so much more than just the beginning of how do you make decisions for a mom.
I
That's a
can
very long-winded
relate.
answer.
I can relate to that because in September, my father got COVID from me, and we called 911 and we asked him, not only did we ask, but the EMT asked, and they said, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And he kept saying no. So they laughed. And then I got to my father and I said, "You can't even get up." And I was in his face. This is true story. And I said, "How are you going to get up? Can you get up?" And he couldn't. And so I said, "Well, if they ask you, you have to say what?" He said, "I have to say yes." So we called them back and they came and they took him. But that's when we realized the power of attorney and how important it is. And we have been in this whole process, and I'm learning about trust and I'm learning about the different types of trust. So let's get into that, because this is probably something that if you have parents who are aging or you're looking to get them qualified for Medicaid, these are some things you need to understand, that this is going to come up in conversations. So let's get into it. Even if you have a business, this is a word, trust, planning, because anything can happen. So for those who don't know, what is a trust?
So I think the simplest, so I use this analogy. I'm trying to figure out how to patent it. The lawyer just doesn't get all creative, but imagine, everything you've got in your life, whatever it is, right? The chair you're sitting on, everything you're sitting on in this theoretical life, if you live in my world, is it all fits in a backpack and we all wear it everywhere we go. When you die, the idea is that the backpack drops and your family will pick it up and take it to a courthouse and they will say, here's my mom's life. And before they can get anything in that backpack, they have to pay taxes. They have to pay capital gains if they're selling investment properties. And it's quite a long process. It takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months, depending on, did you die with a will? Did you not die with a will? What were your intentions? It's basically a wind down period for your life. And for anybody who's been there, it is a very horrid process because it's just a lot of administrative stuff while you're grieving. There's a lot of, your parents' bills don't stop if your mom passes away. You have to handle all of that. So creating a trust is the idea that you're alive, you have your book bag on, and you go to a lawyer and you say, you know what? Let's create another backpack. Let's create a second backpack. You and I, we're going to create one right now. And this backpack doesn't belong to Diana. It doesn't belong on her back. We're going to create this bag and it belongs to her kids. And we're going to call it the trust bag. And the trust bag is being gifted to your kids or your spouse or whoever you want to deem it as a gift to. We're gifting it right now, but we're gifting it on this like projection of time into the future. And you say, while I'm alive, I'm going to hold this bag and I'm going to hold it safe and I'm going to hold it close to me, but it's no longer mine because I've already gifted it. So then with your lawyer, with me, because you're going to call me, we start taking stuff out of your actual bag, like your house. We take it out of your bag. We put it into the trust bag. We take your bank accounts. We put it into the trust. So now what you've created is your actual physical bag, your belongings. There's nothing there. So in the idea of the trust, when you die, now if you drop your bag, your kids don't need to take it to a courthouse because there's nothing in there. You've emptied it all out prior to death. And you've said, this belongs to my kids. And you've created sort of triggers on when the bag gets passed. So trigger could be death. Okay, my mom died. She had a trust. I'm now the trustee. I'm the holder of the bag. So without probate, without any of like changing ownerships or taxes, you're now holding this bag your family left for you. And you're skipping probate, you're skipping the instructions and all of that. So that's the bare essence of what's a trust. Obviously, as entrepreneurs, you're thinking, what other benefits are there? LLCs, C Corps, S Corps, we all hear about corporate veils. If you have one, you can't get sued. We live in America. You're likely to get sued regardless, right? So the job really is to kind of keep that corporate veil from piercing so it doesn't go into your private belongings. But if it's, let's say that your business is, to go with the backpack example, a water bottle company, let's just say, and you're keeping your business in your backpack and it's a water bottle, pierce the corporate veil, we pierce that plastic and it spills all over your bag. If you don't have a trust, you've now implicated your money, your house, and everything in a lawsuit and liabilities. But if your stuff is in a trust, and you pierce the corporate veil, there's nothing else in your bag for people to sue. There's nothing for them to take. Very similarly with debt, if you have a trust and you die with debt, they can only take it out of your bag. So essentially, the trust is essentially a whole new entity that you've created, that you've gifted to your family. And there's a lot of tax benefits. There's quite a lot of instructional benefits that help you. You know, there's the liability aspect. I always share what my trust says because I feel like that's the best way to sort of explain it to people. My trust says if I die today and my kids are under 18, if I only had a will, whoever gets my kids would have control of my wealth because my kids are the one to inherit it and they're not old enough to carry the bag, right? But because I have a trust, the person who's going to hold the bag is separate from my kids and who they're caring for them. And that bag says, if I die and they're under 18, you can use 20% of my wealth to care for their health and their safety and food and shelter. And that's all that the trust could be used for. From 18 to 25, you can use an additional 20% of my wealth, whatever my wealth could be at death, 20% of it between that age group is going to go towards education. If they don't want to get an education, that's fine. They're just not going to have access to whatever I've left for them. And from 25 to 35, I've created it. I'm in real estate, so mine says you can buy a house. You should buy investment properties and use the money from the trust. Use up to 20% of it, but qualify for a mortgage first. So in my eyes, I've now set up that if I die today or if I die in 10 years, my kids are going to have my wealth left over until they're 35 with sort of restrictions that I believe are going to help them live their life. And at 35, they get the rest of it. So trusts are magical because you can sort of create whatever parameters you want to create. I've created some crazy ones. I've created some good ones. And it allows you to have this control that a will wouldn't. A will just says, you get my stuff. But I can say, you get my stuff so long as you do X in a trust.
And those are like what you just shared is really, really helpful because you don't understand its role until someone passes away. And especially our elderly parents or like even just myself, anything happens. I just say elderly parents because we see it more often with them because we know that something's happened and they are no longer with us. But there's a lot of things like right now, having to create a trust for my father was a big thing. Had I known beforehand that we should have started years ago, then it would look differently. So now that comes the question of when should you start thinking about planning for the future? Like, should we start when we're 5 or like, when we get older?
So people always tell me people over the age of 18 are your clients. And I feel like that's accurate to a degree, right? Because if you are above the age of 18, you have stuff. Whether or not it feels like you do or you don't, you have stuff. You should do the very basics of planning so that you can protect your kids, right? You can protect whatever is valuable to you. And I always tell people plan ahead because I think one of the hardest things is this story happened to me with my mom. And I know you and I spoke a little bit about what's happened to your dad off air. And the truth is, when you meet somebody in their 60s, most of them have their stuff together. But when you meet somebody my age in my 30s, no one has their stuff together. And the question always is, well, why not? Why don't you have a will? Or why don't you have a trust? And they're not thinking about death. They're not thinking about all of these conceptualized ideas because it's so far out for them. But the 60-year-olds, the reason they have their stuff together is because there was somebody in their life that triggered that for them, whether or not they lost a parent, they had to care for a parent, they had to care for a child that was sick. All these little triggers in life, we wait too late for them to happen. And my mom's issue came out overnight. And the truth is that I can name 3 or 4 very prevalent examples that would have people thinking, my 6-year-old just got diagnosed with a couple things and he's young. So he could be a world leader or he could turn 18 and need dependence on me and my husband. I don't know which way it's going to go, right? He's too young to tell. If I die unexpectedly and I'm caring for him at the age of 18 and he inherits all this money and he's considered special needs, inheriting my wealth will disqualify him from government benefits that he would have otherwise needed. Whereas if I set up a trust to care for him, that wouldn't disqualify him from those benefits. And if you're caring for somebody with special needs, that's something to consider.
I'm just like soaking this in because this is really, really good information because you're not thinking about this. Like you're thinking about, okay, this has to be done later in life. No, you could start now. And Yolanda has a really good question is, can you have a will and a trust?
Yes, so you do. Usually, the issue is that when you have a trust, your trust is your bag, right? You put everything in that bag. But what happens if you put your house, your bank account, all of that in the name of the trust, and then you're walking home and you win the lottery? It can happen. And then a bus falls on you. I know, crazy examples. But you don't have time to go to a bank and put it in the trust account, right? So if you don't die with a will, it'll be viewed that that actually belonged to you versus the trust. So the will sort of serves a purpose to pour it back into the trust. The will just say, hey, listen, if I died and I accidentally forgot to put something in my bag that's supposed to go to my kids, my intention was that it was supposed to go there. And I just want the world to be given a notice that we have a trust. The second portion for the will is to cover who cares for your kids, right? I always say the horrible joke, kids can't breathe in a bag. They're not items. So you have to name the guardian for your kids. So those are the two vital aspects of a will that continue to exist even with a trust. You should have both. Most of the time, if you work with a lawyer, they'll provide you both. For those of you who are like me and like to Google celebrities, which I do that a lot, wills are public. Anybody who's died, doesn't matter what celebrity it is, you can look up their will, which means that if they don't have a trust, you can figure out how much they're worth, where their stuff is, where their house is located, all of that. But yet, all of the celebrities that we look up to, I can't find any of their private information because on paper, their will doesn't say anything. They've got everything in a trust, which is kept private and secure and considered nobody's business.
Ooh, that's good to know. So if you have a business, you can definitely put things in that trust to, because sometimes, you think you have a good partner, but things get real funny when things happen and then money gets involved. It gets real, real funny. And
It does.
I want to ask, have you ever encountered some real funny, funny situations?
So I have a client actually right now, sweetest man in the world, but worth quite a lot of money, quite a lot. And he is 80 something. And you would think that he'd have his stuff in order, right? But he's married, second marriage. His wife is also 80 something. He comes into my office and he was like, I want to die and I want to leave everything for my wife. And I was like, okay, cool. He's like, here's the problem. She's showing signs of dementia. I'm showing signs of dementia. We're old and her kids are money hungry. And we don't have the same kids. And he said the problem is that the house that we own is under both our names. So if I die with a will and it says my stuff goes to my kids, they can't even enter the house because it belongs to her. And while I don't think that she would keep them away from my stuff, if she's not lucid or capable of understanding what's happening and I don't trust her kids, there's no protection there. So you sort of hear that and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that, right? Like you don't consider mixed marriages and how they can impact, but really most of us have a second marriage, right? That's what statistics say. And most of us have stepkids. The other factors is same-sex marriage is currently legal in the United States. It might not be legal in a few years. And if you don't have your stuff in order, what's considered a spouse or what's considered a child? And those are all aspects of the things they deal with every single day. I got some real crazy ladies too. I had a lady who said all of her kids are not great. So she bought a parrot and told me that the trust was to say whoever cared for the parrot would get all her money. I Googled it. Parrots live till they're 75.
Wow.
You should have seen me tell that one to her kids.
That, these are interesting conversations with a lawyer. That's a good podcast. Anybody thinking of podcast, lawyer? So Yolanda said thank you for sharing because she found it very helpful. If you have questions or if you're kind of like, I don't know if I'm setting myself up and my family for the future, what are the best ways to get in touch with you?
The best way, I think, and this is people find this weird, but I give my cell phone number out on everything because, again, I promise that I'm always available. So my cell number is 443-739-6724. That's my actual cell. If anybody wants to text me, you'll see it works. And then also my website is, I think my name says DK Law. So my website is just dklawmd as in Maryland.com. Happy to talk to anybody, even if you're not local, just to kind of pick your brain, see what I can help with.
And I would highly suggest reaching out to her. Funny story, if you want to know, I love telling people how we met. And so I actually was looking on Indeed, looking for lawyers who were looking for social media managers. I sent an email. She totally ignored it.
I
I
trash
sent
it.
I did send a video email and immediately she wanted to talk. So that's the trick. And then we got on a call and then here we are today. And I will tell you, like, there was a time not too long ago where I really did need to talk to somebody. Like, I couldn't get in touch with the lawyer that we were working with. And I really did want to talk to Diane, and I didn't have her number. So that was, on me. But uh, just today, she said, you could have called me. I would have answered your question because you never know. You're getting into something you don't understand. You think you can read a document and understand everything that's said in the document. But I am one person that day. I even got frazzled. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but we figured it out. So I do want to ask this to you because when it comes to limiting factors or limiting beliefs, what stops people from planning for their future or planning, for what could happen in the future?
It's a hard conversation, right? It's a hard conversation. I think people go about it really wrong. I think people, when they think will, they're thinking, money or house, and they're not ready to think about that. And I'm trying to change that conversation, right? One of my friends lost her mom, and I asked her, what was the hardest thing? What was the hardest thing for you outside of losing your mom? Because you can't top that. And she said, 6 months. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, 6 months. And I was like, gotta give me a little bit more, right? And she goes, it took 6 months before I figured out the burial grounds, where my mom's body was, how my dad was going to care for himself, how to wrap up her Medicaid, how to stop the Social Security checks, how to figure out how to wind down her life, pay her bills, take over insurance. She was like, my mom died, and the next morning for 6 months, I was handling stuff. And when I thought about that, I was like, well, what'd you do at the end of the 6 months? And she said, well, I went back to work. I was back at work and things had slowed down. And I was like, okay, I can finally focus on life. And everybody had forgotten that I'd lost my mom because 6 months is a great time to grieve. And I had a breakdown at my desk. And I had this breakdown thinking, like, it was the first moment I had to myself. And when I heard that, I said, I need to change the topics. It's not about houses. It's not about that. So now I go up to people and I say, hey, Sri, when you die, what flowers do you want at your funeral? And people look at me and they're like, who cares? I'm going to be dead. I'm like, okay, what outfit do you want to wear? And they look at me like, are you crazy? And I'm like, did you know that they're also going to ask you if you should wear a bra or not? If the body should wear a bra at the burial? And that's when people look at me crazy. And I'm like, if you don't have answers to these questions because you think they're stupid, every single one of those questions will be asked of your child when they're grieving 24 hours of losing you. And they look at me and I'm like, that's why you need to get your stuff in order, because it's not about us. It's not about the people who are here. Like, it's not about you while you're alive. It's really about taking care of the people who love you to alleviate them from these decisions. It's not just finances, right? It's a lot. They are, regardless if you have a good relationship or a bad relationship with somebody you love, regardless whether or not things are well right now, things change and things evolve. And you need to focus on that because, believe it or not, people's relationships get strained after death because they're grieving and things aren't right. And, when my mom was sick, I went to Target and they told me get a blanket for her. She needs a blanket. The ones at the hospital don't work. I'm very practical. I normally Target 5 minutes in and out, grab a blanket, walk out. Doesn't really matter if she just needs warmth and comfort, right? I spent 45 minutes looking at stupid blankets that day. And I was just sitting there staring at them and thinking, like, if she gets it out of the hospital and this blanket has flowers, is she gonna like these flowers? What's her favorite color? And it was not about the blanket that day. So when you're thinking about, estate planning, whether or not you're an entrepreneur and thinking about who's gonna take my business over and who's gonna handle, a buyback agreement for insurance, or, who's gonna handle my affairs, you got to realize that your child or your spouse or your uncle or your niece, they're grieving you. They're not thinking about the business you've built. They're not thinking about money. And sometimes that comes out with anger towards each other because some people don't know how to not be angry in time of sadness. And some people live in grief. And we have to all take people as they are. And our job as humans is to try to make it easy for those we love.
As you were talking, we have Angelique. Her and her husband, they do a weekly show 3 times a week, and they talk about life insurance. They talk about planning. And she is saying right here, yes, understanding is not common sense, unfortunately. So glad you're holding this discussion. Yolanda says it's the responsible thing to do, especially if you have children. Angelique is like, put me in a bra because she has all boys and they will not understand why I need a bra. Please check yes for me. And she says, don't let them go without making decisions for me. If you know your children, you know your children. Like, this is like, I know my daughter and I'm having this conversation now. It's making me think about what I need to do, because what's the funny story is I'm having this conversation with my mom because I've had friends who've had parents who died unexpectedly. And some of the text messages that are coming are, we're just talking about what kind of flowers to have. Should it be cremated? Should the body be put in a box? Because nothing was said, it's a huge battle. And I was just like, yeah, I don't want to go through this. Like, we need to nip this in the bud, like, take care of it. I'm with Angelique. We don't, I don't want to be taking care of that, because I do understand there is a lot going on when you have to help your parents or your business or whatever. I wouldn't want to put that in anybody else. So guess what, guys? I know this is a really good conversation. But what's happening is we're going to invite you to come on over to Instagram, because we're going to continue this conversation. If you have questions, if you don't want to follow us, but you still have questions, definitely reach out to Diana. She's here on LinkedIn. She's everywhere. I made sure she got herself on on LinkedIn, because one of the things I told her, I said, we're going live on LinkedIn, and let people
She did.
People are going to want to connect with you. So give them a reason to connect with you. And I think that it's worked because she's here on LinkedIn. And then also, yes, Angelique, you do need to have Diana on your show. Please reach out to her, plugging you in. Diana, see, I'm trying to get you booked already.
I love it. Angelique, just message me. I'll message you back as soon as this show's over. I just like to book out. So let's do it.
Yes. So again, we're going to end this. Next week, I have a wonderful guest. It's actually 2 people, Drew and his partner for business. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of craziness. But like I said, we're taking this conversation to Instagram. I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined in on the conversation. Thank you, Diana, for your time today. And until the next live, everybody, bye.